In this episode of the Project Management Podcast, we learn how to prepare for the facilitated project planning meeting.
Hello and welcome back to the Project Management Podcast at pm-podcast.com. This is premium episode number 442 and I'm Cornelius Fichtner. As always, premium means that this interview is reserved for you, our premium subscribers. So thank you for your financial support of the Project Management Podcast. Rich Maltzman and Jim Stewart are back on the program today to talk about goblins. No, wait, checking my notes here. No goblins today. Instead, the focus is on preparing a facilitated project planning meeting. We look at resolving any looming, unaddressed issues before the meeting starts, how to make sure that the financial investment of a planning meeting actually pays off, and then Rich and Jim talk us through about 8 actionable activities that they recommend that you do in order to plan the meeting right. We close the discussion with the number one thing that each of them has personally learned about running a good project planning meeting while they were researching and writing the book. It's good stuff. Enjoy the interview. Hello, Rich. Welcome back.
Good to be back.
And also, Jim, welcome back to the Project Management Podcast.
Thank you, sir. Looking forward to the second one.
In this interview, we are going to look at a second chapter from your book titled How to Facilitate Productive Project Planning Meetings. Jim, what is your interest in the topic and why write a book about it?
Well, I'm interested in the topic because I find that meetings aren't necessarily well run. There's a lot of things that cause them to fail. And since meetings are sort of the backbone of our projects, I find it important to know as much as I can and share that information with others. Why write a book about it? Because I have a colleague who I used to teach for at one of the local colleges, and I was batting around ideas for a book with him, and he said, you know those big meetings you do where you go to pharmaceuticals and high-tech companies and plan schedules and stuff? And I said, yeah. He said, I would read a book about that. So I thought, well, if he would, then probably others like him would. So that's when I engaged Rich, and I said, what do you think about this idea? And we went with it.
Mm-hmm. And also, Jim, we've looked at Chapter 6 in the first interview, the Zen of Facilitation. Now we're going to look at Chapter 8, preparing for the facilitated project planning meeting. That's our final interview. Let's see, we were doing a third interview. Is there a third chapter in the book which you think is key to doing a good job in facilitating these meetings?
Yeah, I think, and this is just my own opinion on this, I would toss up between Chapter 16, facilitating meetings in a multicultural environment, or Chapter 10, facilitating a virtual meeting. I'd probably lean towards 10 because we have a whole chapter that written by one of our colleagues, and everybody meets virtually. We're doing it right now. And there's an art to that. So I would lean towards Chapter 10 virtual and possibly 16, the multicultural.
And we are doing a virtual meeting in a sense here. And I remember before we started, half an hour before this, there were a flurry of emails going back and forth just between the three of us trying to figure out, are we going to do this audio or video or what? And,
right.
So that was, one of the things that we actually forgot to talk about.
Right.
And these kind of things are important for virtual meetings. Right. Rich, Chapter 8, titled Preparing for the Project Planning Meeting. And it starts out like this in your book. Before you plan and schedule your meeting, be sure that there aren't any looming, unaddressed issues that might crop up during the meeting. How do we go about doing that if they are looming and unaddressed and we may not even know about them?
Yes. So this is really along the lines of hidden agendas. There are going to be things that might pop up because people have just been waiting for this particular case when marketing is there to go after marketing, or some installation recently went poorly, or some research project went poorly, and these people are here to talk about why that didn't work for their department, kind of a us versus them. So here it's about stakeholders, like location in real estate. So we think the best thing to do is to kind of be blunt talk to stakeholders beforehand, kind of schmooze, find out what's been going on. Part of this is kind of an attribute of people. You need to be politically savvy. You need to understand the dynamics of what might be going on. And one of the tools for this that we actually have in the book is a 3D stakeholder matrix. Like most PMI things, and I've been active in PMI, so I can insult them a little bit in a nice collegial way. One of the things PMI is really good at is making flat matrices, 2x2s, 3x3s, triangles, but they're always two-dimensional. The stakeholder matrix, for example, the power interest grid, is absent of the attitude element. It's power versus interest, and it doesn't have that any height, any depth. Think about attitude. So who's in favor of this meeting? Who's in favor of this project? Who might be a kind of a savior because they're interested, they've got a positive attitude, and they're powerful, right? Who are those people? You don't share this with everyone. This is something that you keep in your back pocket so that you are aware of it. So just awareness, really.
And since we are talking about missing dimensions here, Rich, there's one dimension that everyone is always interested in, and that is money, money, money. These planning meetings, they are expensive to run. Rich, how do I ensure that I get a good return on my investment out of such a planning meeting?
So that's a really good question, and it is one that is going to be asked. Why are we flying all these people into Omaha for this meeting? Well, the key is to think of it not as a return on investment, but a prevention of loss. Now, I know it doesn't have a fancy acronym. There's not a lot of people use POL, but I'd like to start that today. POL. Business Insider magazine just recently published an article that estimates 37 billion in excess expenses and lost revenue are due simply to poorly run meetings.
Wow.
And an example of that might be a meeting where you're doing it by virtue of Zoom when you really needed the face-to-face. Now, I don't want to hit on Zoom because it's actually quite a nice tool, and you get a good portion of it. Still, any kind of poorly run meeting is going to be prone to loss of money. In fact, there's an entire chapter in the book. This might be my choice for an additional chapter to read, would be 18, chapter 18, which is devoted to the cost of not running a good meeting.
Right.
Jim, the book includes a sample agenda and a schedule. First of all, how did you develop the sample agenda and then decide which items to include and which ones to leave off?
Well, the agenda, I think between at least the two of us, not even, maybe including yourself, we've done hundreds of agendas. So it sort of initially sprang out of our heads as how it should look. The thing about an agenda, it's vital, but then there are a million templates online and even within Microsoft Word that you come up with. So as far as the look and feel, you have your choice of that. Now, what we put in there and what we didn't, I think we put what we thought were the vital pieces of information, but I want to make it clear here, and if it isn't hopefully clear enough in the book, it isn't necessarily exhaustive. We don't know what would go into an agenda versus for construction versus a meeting of psychologists versus a meeting of pharmaceutical people versus a meeting of high-tech people. So we sort of wanted to say, you need an agenda, here's a sample agenda, but don't take it as being the ultimate, I must copy this exactly. So that was the idea behind that. And secondly, I know you have this question in mind as well about a schedule and what you said, should we send these out to attendees? Yes, to answer both. But what I've done recently is sort of marry the agenda and schedule. So the agenda, and this I think is important, shows not only what you're talking about, but timelines. And when I've done recently these cybersecurity meetings, security people will speak for an hour. Compliance people will speak for an hour. So you marry the agenda to the schedule, not only because it's logical, but it just saves one less artifact to share. So to summarize there, the agenda was sort of, we created, and I also we created it from agendas we've done before. We don't intend it to be exhaustive. You can tweak it to whatever you need. And the schedule, I find, is beneficial to combine with the agenda.
Yeah, I did the same thing earlier this year. PMI changed the PMP exam, the exam content outline, and we flew everybody into Tucson, not into Omaha. And we had a planning meeting here for how are we going to update all our PMP exam prep products to this new world order, so to speak. And I was in charge of creating the agenda/schedule, and I created a single document that gave us everything. It was all in one, and everybody knew who was talking when, and that actually went pretty well. The good news here is I was able to go back 2.5 or 3 years when we did the same thing, and I pretty much could just go, okay, that worked. That agenda, that schedule worked for us back then. Let's just update it and run with it. And, why reinvent the wheel?
I think the KISS, keep it simple, stupid philosophy applies here. You got highly intelligent people in the room. You don't want to hit them with too much information. And likewise, in the agenda/schedule that I did for these certification meetings, we're doing a number of them bang, 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 back to back. And so every time we do it, I'm tweaking a little bit. But yeah, I took the last agenda schedule where we had invited more people than we thought, sent it back to the people involved, the people running it, small team of us. And now we do our next a compliance meeting in next month. We pretty much know who all the players are. We can just refashion that agenda, and it saves us a lot of work going forward, which is a whole different topic. But as you said, it's good to go. We're learning our lessons and applying them.
Mm. One more question about the agenda and schedule. This one's for Rich. Yeah. Is there one section on the agenda or on the schedule that stands out to you as being particularly important?
Yeah, I would say far and away the objective of the meeting. So the meeting's objective should be top, front, and center of that page. Also, this is something that I recently realized. I think I've realized it a long time ago, but I've taken action on it. Since the meeting agenda and objective will be transmitted via email, think about the subject line.
Right.
I've noticed that the subject line in email is sometimes all people will read. So if your subject line says meeting in room 402, that does not sound enticing, unless room 402 is infamous for the best donuts. So your objective should be right. This planning meeting for key new customer XYZ, or introduce the pharmaceutical Zazatrol, or whatever it is. Put that in make sure that's in the objective of the agenda, but also that should carry over into the subject line, because that subject line is going to be forwarded to other people, and they're going to see meeting in room 402. Not very attractive.
Mm-hmm.
I mentioned it in the first interview. Each of your chapters includes a lot of tips. I mean, there are bullets after bullets after bullets. In fact, this particular chapter, I counted them. 29 meeting agenda tips. 29. Well, we can't go through all of them.
It was Rich's responsibility to come up with 30, Rich.
No. In the culture of Lower Slobovia, 29 is an inherently lucky number.
That's a Dilbert reference.
All right. So would each of you please pick 2, maybe 3 of these tips for our viewers? And how do you want to do this? Do you want to alternate, or just one of you want to take the 2 or 3 and then the other one?
Can I start and then Rich go to Rich? Is that cool?
All right.
Cool.
All right. Meeting agenda tips. Set expectations. It's a big, when people come to your meeting, they want to know what it's all about, who's going to be there. They want to walk in. Stakeholders don't like surprises. Wait a minute. I thought this was to plan our house, not to plan, the color of the house or whatever it might be. So they like it. They don't like you don't want to mismatch expectations with the reality of what you're doing. So make sure when they come in, by the time they get to the meeting, that they know what they're there for. And that can be done by a series of phone calls, emails. We did it in a half hour just before this, with whether we're going to be on camera or not. Secondly, expect resistance. You are excited about your project. Do you think the people in the room are necessarily? They have their own projects, and you will have some goblins. So when somebody resists you or counteracts you, oh, what do I do now? You have a plan for that. And lastly, I'd say plan for everything. The monitor might go out. You've got your slides in hand. The room might go dark. It's almost like your risk management plan. We'll run back to the office, whatever it might be. You can't plan for, the sudden snowstorm that comes, maybe that'll be expected. But plan as much as you can, because not only will you feel better, but people come away. They keep asking me to manage these meetings, to do these There's security things we're doing. I'm no genius at this. And by the way, I try to make sure I practice what I preach, what I wrote in this book, or what we wrote in this book. But they know I can get it done. This is a company that if you do something bad once, they'll never ask you to do it again. So you want people to admire or respect what you do, but more importantly, you want the meeting to happen. And you want to plan. You want to have your contingency plans for anything that might go wrong. Those are my tips.
Okay, and for me, it's ground rules. We've talked before about them, but I see them as one of the top of these 29 tips, and that is making sure in advance people know that in your meeting, let's say it's not necessarily one of them, but let's say laptops closed. We don't want you working in this meeting. We want you working with this meeting. And that means your laptop is closed unless you need it to extract particular information. Maybe cell phones are off. Just heard a great talk, actually. Highly recommend to your viewers a TED Talk by, I can't remember, her last name is Fry, F-R-E-I, from Harvard Business School, about trust. And she talks about working at Uber as a consultant. And one of the first things she noticed is that people were texting each other in the meeting about the meeting. And so she has instituted a ground rule that said phones off and away. Mm. Now, that's just an example. There could be other ones about appearance and dress or you name it. But setting those in advance is key. The next one, which you could tie back to ground rules, is assign pre-work as necessary. People come to the meeting with a completely open mind, and that's good, but they might come with an empty notebook, and maybe you want them to have addressed an issue or be ready to talk about something or to have read a marketing report or look at something a competitor was doing before the meeting. And not only is that okay, it's preferred. Your meeting will be much, much more effective if everyone has read the same sheet of music. And a good example of this would be, hey, company X, Acme, if you know the Roadrunner cartoons, Acme is working on this thing. I want you to read their advertisement for this because I want to be sensitive to what they're pushing to the world. So when we look at our competing product, we know what they're saying to the world. So everyone come to the meeting having read Acme's, brochure. I think we underuse that. And I think people actually appreciate, even though it's kind of a pain, I have to do this before the meeting. It's going to yield a lot of fruit. And actually they say, you know what? It's good that we all have the same frame of reference.
I'd like to add one thing to what Rich said about the cell phone situation. A technique I've sometimes used, I get in front of the room in the beginning and say, how many people here have their wife is ready to deliver, or they have a medical emergency that they're waiting to hear about, or their boss might call them? Show of hands. Okay, you 3 people hang on your phone. The rest of them put them away. So I'm being flexible, saying there are people who need to have their phone handy, and the rest of you clearly don't. So
Jim, we made it to 30. We made it to 30.
30?
Yeah.
We did. There you go.
Here's how I approach this situation. I actually turn it around. I usually get myself a $10 gift card, for whatever, Starbucks or a shop, and I make it into a game. I say, okay, so turning your cell phones off, that is so last year. Okay. What I want you to do is I want you to take out your phone, put it at its loudest possible setting and put it in front of you. Okay. The first one who receives a phone call, a unsolicited phone call, so you're not allowed to call each other or text your wife, hey, call me, gets the gift card. Okay. And then, within an hour or so, inevitably, somebody gets a phone call and, the phone goes off and, we hand out the gift card. And then we say, okay, game's over, phone's off, phone's away. Right. So that kind of turns the whole phone situation into gamification, right?
Gamification.
I think, Rich, we reached 31.
Now we're at 31, which is a lucky number in the Seychelles Islands.
Yes, and I get 0.1% of the royalties for that one.
And Cornelius, you are an honorary Tina the Tangent Taker.
Although a good one.
All right. I'm not sure who wants to take the next question here, but I want to jump to the end of the chapter because the chapter closes with a planning meeting readiness checklist. This is a pretty high-level checklist, so I would assume that you would expect that your readers take this as a starting point and add more detail, right?
Yeah, I'll take that one. So, as it says in the book, use this checklist to make sure you're ready for your planning meeting, and the meeting sponsor should sign off on it. Expand the list as needed, just like the agenda. What do we know about So, for how it's used when I have my meetings. We bring it up very often virtual, and we go through it one by one. Have we done this? Have we done this? Have we done this? So that's why we have it. But Rich and I can't speak to. For example, some companies say when you people come to. I've gone into companies where I've had to watch a video for safety before I could walk in. Well, I don't know where to put that in this checklist. Or it might be a government installation. We have to go through three levels of security and 12 people come to get you. So what we're saying here is use this as an idea stimulator, but it's by no means comprehensive. We wanted to say that. They'll get the idea, but we don't say this is your comprehensive checklist because it flat out is not. But the important thing is to have a checklist, and everybody should go through it. We're good, we're good, we're good, we're good. People will not necessarily want to do that. But when they see the value of it, they say, wow, this is a good idea. Again, what Rich and I think of is common sense.
Before we get to the final question here to close our interview, let me ask a question about the book itself and how you envision that people use this. Is this more sort of a workbook? I'm preparing a meeting, so I'm looking at the preparation chapters, or is this something that you would read cover to cover?
We've written this so that you could use it as a reference book and, hey, I'm doing a 2-day planning meeting. Let me read that chapter. There's actually a chapter on project management. We call it project management refresher, like almost a PM 101, because we realize that a facilitator you may hire a facilitator to be brought into your meeting, and they need to know a little more context. So there's a refresher. Plus, we realize we may have some readers who just want to refresh some basic concepts about PM. So it's meant to be read cover to cover. It can be, but it also can be used a bit as just reference. The chapters are chunked. You said it was 100. What is it? 220
pages? 220. Yeah.
Yeah, 220 pages thick. We like to think of it as being 220 pages thin, which is just a different perspective. There are 18 chapters and then appendices, and everything's kind of chunked up so that you can read it that way. Also, flipping through it, I'm proud to say that it's got a lot of illustrations. Every other page, sometimes 2 or 3 on a page, pictures of a racing matrix, pictures of a triple constraint. We use a case. So to answer your question and not become garrulous Gary here, one of the things we've done to make it more readable cover to cover is we have threaded through a case study of a mayor in California, of a city in California, who ran on a platform in her first term that was very ecologically based. And now she wants to get reelected, and she's kind of been criticized that she's not living a green or sustainable life. So she's going to publicly build a sustainable house for herself and her family. And we take that through the WBS and kind of her timeline and her milestones. So it's really a project. It's not just a facilitation book, how to run a meeting. This is what Jim and I really sought after, was to write a book that our discipline, you and I and our friends in project management would tune into, because it was written from a project manager's perspective. My point is, and I do have one, that the threaded case makes it a little easier to read cover to cover.
And I think that it's interesting. I'm a pretty big book reader, and I find that during my lifetime, I found that people just don't like to read books, and especially in our day and age now. They're reading on the web. There's Kindle version of this, but they're reading the web. They're distracted by the news, and they just don't have the time or the wherewithal. They're busy. They've got kids. So yeah, I would never say read it cover to cover or don't bother. Read it cover to cover if you can. Some people have, or just cherry pick out the chapters that are relevant to you and read those.
To close our interview, what is the number one thing that you personally learned about running a good project planning meeting as you were writing the book? Jim, you want to go first?
I think that I've learned it more like reinforced it. It's that whole facilitation skill. I relearned that facilitating a meeting is just not standing in front of a room. When Rich and I teach, we're somewhat facilitating, but we're primarily teaching. When you hold a half-hour status meeting, you're facilitating, but you're really running a meeting. So that distinction between just running a meeting and facilitating, where you're actually resolving conflict, rewriting the agenda as needed, moving things along. There are actually certifications and neither Rich or I have them, but I'm tempted in facilitation that people can get, showing the importance. So I would say if that's the thing that I didn't learn so much as reinforced is how important it is to be a good facilitator. And as I said in the session the other day, and I say it again, if you are shy about getting up in front of a room and you've never done this before, bring in somebody who's done it or somebody within the company or hire somebody, because it's going to be a mess and things will be worse than if you had never done it at all.
And Rich, what was it for you?
For me, I would say that it's about learning from others. One of the things I always tell my students is we're here to learn together. I know that sounds corny, but it's true, especially at the graduate level. So I'm learning from students all the time. Well, in this case, we're learning from grizzled veterans. And we also had guest chapters. So Wayne Trammell wrote our chapter on virtual meetings. I learned a lot from that. Teresa Lawrence wrote a chapter specifically devoted to how to facilitate brainstorming and kind of the psychology of what would make you draw out the most from others at your meeting in terms of brainstorming. And then we have an Appendix D, and I highly recommend Appendix D. It just sounds good. No, it is called Meeting War Stories.
Oh, yeah.
So these are stories from, I don't remember how many, I'm going to say 10, 15 stories. Some of them are just one paragraph about all kinds of things weird things that have happened at projects. And just by reading some of these, you're saying, wow, that could happen to me. So how can I retrospectively go back and plan it? And of course, every time one of these grizzled veterans sent us one of their stories, we invited them through a discussion on LinkedIn. You get another notch higher in your capabilities because, wow, that happened to you? That really, yeah, it did. So I'd say really enjoy. Definitely, Appendix D can stand on its own, and I think you'll hear some stories, and more importantly, to your question, you'll learn something from it.
Thank you. Once again, the book is called How to Facilitate Productive Project Planning Meetings, a Practical Guide to Ensuring Project Success. It is a little over 220 pages thin. In fact, 220 pages means it is 536 pages thinner than the PMBOK Guide 6th edition. It is published by Maven House, and it was written by Rich Maltzman and Jim Stewart. Rich, thank you so much for being on the program again.
You're welcome. Great to be here. It's 1 centimeter. I just measured it. 1 centimeter.
All right. And Jim, thank you also for your time today.
Thank you, Cornelius. And this book sounds so good, I'm going to have to read it myself.
Rich Maltzman is Senior Lecturer at Boston University Metropolitan College, author and speaker on sustainability in project management. And Jim Stewart is a consultant, trainer, and mentor for result-driven project management. And that's it. Thank you very much for listening. Please visit PM-podcast for show notes, links, transcripts, and PDU information. Our email address is info@pm-podcast.com. And finally, we have this. People who enjoy meetings should not be allowed to be in charge of anything. Until next time. Whenever you're ready.
In this episode of the Project Management Podcast, we learn how to prepare for the facilitated project planning meeting.
One take. Rich, learn from this.
Easy, Carl.
I'm sorry. I'll get it right the next time.
Only one take,
Jim. Okay, then.